The rain fell in sheets against the diner's windows, each drop a tiny hammer against the glass. Maya wiped down the same corner of the counter for the third time, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind cataloged everything she needed to ignore. The ache in her lower back from the double shift, the way her manager's eyes lingered too long when he passed, the envelope in her locker with the eviction notice she couldn't bring herself to open. The lunch rush had died an hour ago, leaving only the elderly couple in booth 3 and the small figure hunched in the corner booth, staring at the laminated menu like it held the secrets of the universe. The child couldn't have been more than 7. Dark hair plastered to his forehead, clothes soaked through, and eyes too old for his face. Maya had seen that look before, in her own mirror years ago, before she'd learned to hide it. He'd been sitting there for 20 minutes, and she knew he had no money. She could read it in the way his fingers gripped the menu's edges, the way his gaze kept darting to the door, calculating escape routes. Her manager, Dennis, emerged from the kitchen with his usual scowl, and Maya felt her shoulders tense automatically. The movement was instinctive now, a survival mechanism she'd developed over months of navigating his moods, his comments, his casual cruelties disguised as management. Dennis's eyes landed on the boy, and his expression hardened into something mean and petty. Maya knew that look too. Kid's been here long enough. Tell him to order or leave. Dennis crossed his arms, blocking her path to the kitchen, making sure she understood this wasn't a suggestion. It was a test, one of many he administered daily, seeing how far he could push before she pushed back. Maya had learned not to push back. Pushing back got you fired, got you blacklisted in a small town where everyone knew everyone, got you sleeping in your car with winter coming on fast and cold. He's just waiting for someone, Maya heard herself say, though she knew it was a lie. They both knew it was a lie. The boy's shoulders had that hunched quality of someone expecting a blow. Someone who'd learned that adults in positions of authority rarely meant anything good. She recognized that posture like looking in a mirror from 5 years ago, before she'd fled her own demons and ended up here in this nowhere town, working this dead-end job, trying to be invisible enough that nothing could find her again. Dennis's eyes narrowed, his jaw working like he was chewing something bitter. Sure he is, and I'm waiting for customers who actually pay. 5 more minutes, then he's out. Handle it, or I will. The threat in his voice was clear, and Maya knew exactly what "I will" meant. It meant Dennis hauling a 7-year-old out into the rain by his collar. It meant making a scene that would humiliate a hungry child. It meant cruelty for cruelty's sake, because Dennis was the kind of man who needed someone smaller to hurt. He disappeared back into the kitchen, and Maya felt something crack open in her chest. Something dangerous and reckless that reminded her why she'd ended up in this situation in the first place, why she couldn't keep a job for more than 6 months, why self-preservation had never been her strong suit. She'd always been the kind of fool who helped stray dogs and people who didn't want helping, who stepped between fists and their targets, who paid for it later in bruises and broken things, but did it anyway because something in her refused to look away. She moved toward the corner booth, her decision already made, consequences be damned. The boy's head was bent over the menu, but she could see the tension in his small frame, could see him preparing to bolt. Maya slid into the opposite seat, moving slowly, keeping her hands visible and her voice soft. Hey there, I'm Maya. What's your name? The boy's head snapped up, defensive walls slamming into place behind those ancient eyes. For a moment, Maya could have sworn she saw something shimmer in his gaze, something that wasn't quite human, but then it was gone, and he was just a scared, hungry child again. I have money, he said, too quickly, his hand going to his pocket in a gesture that was pure performance. She caught the tremor in his fingers, saw the way his throat worked around a swallow. He was a terrible liar, which somehow made her want to protect him even more. The good liars were the dangerous ones. The bad liars were just desperate. I'm sure you do, Maya said, pitching her voice to that careful neutral zone between condescension and conspiracy. But between you and me, the cook made way too many orders of chicken tenders today, and my boss is going to chew me out if I don't get rid of them. Health code stuff, you know. Can't keep them past a certain time. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to a whisper. You'd actually be doing me a favor, save me from a lecture about waste management, and maybe some fries too. Those definitely need to go. Something shifted in the boy's expression, hope maybe, or the memory of what hope used to feel like before life taught him better. His eyes searched her face for the trick, for the hidden cost, for the trap that surely waited beneath kindness. Maya knew that search. She'd conducted it herself 1,000 times, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for generosity to reveal its teeth. When he found nothing but sincerity in her expression, his shoulders dropped half an inch, and he nodded once, sharp and quick, like he was afraid she'd change her mind if he gave her time to think. Maya stood and headed to the kitchen, already composing the lie she'd tell Dennis about the order, already calculating how many shifts it would take to cover the cost from her own pocket. She had eaten enough hunger to recognize it in someone else, knew the particular desperation of counting change and coming up short, of staring at food you couldn't afford and feeling your stomach eat itself from the inside. $23. That's what the meal would cost. She could skip lunch for the next week, could walk the 3 miles home instead of taking the bus, could make it work somehow. She always made it work. Dennis was at the grill, spatula in hand, and barely glanced at her when she called in the order. Table 6, she said, which was close enough to the truth that it didn't taste like ash in her mouth. He grunted acknowledgement, and she busied herself with refilling salt shakers, anything to avoid his attention, anything to make this transaction as invisible as possible. The food appeared faster than his suspicion, steam rising from the basket of golden chicken tenders and perfectly crisp fries, and Maya grabbed it before he could ask questions. She set the plate in front of the boy with a casualness she didn't feel, adding a glass of chocolate milk she definitely couldn't explain away. Here you go, enjoy. He stared at it for a moment, and she watched his throat work again, watched him blink hard against something that might have been tears. Then he began eating with the careful control of someone who'd learned not to draw attention even while starving, someone who knew that showing how hungry you were made you vulnerable, made you a target for mockery or worse. Maya busied herself with unnecessary tasks nearby, keeping watch without watching, giving him privacy while remaining close enough to intervene if Dennis reappeared. The couple in booth 3 paid and left, their departure marked by the cheerful jingle of the door chime that always sounded too optimistic for the atmosphere of the place. The diner fell into that late afternoon lull, empty except for the sound of rain hammering the roof and the boy's quiet, methodical eating. Outside, the storm intensified, lightning forking across the sky gone premature dark. Maya didn't notice the man until he was already inside. He stood in the doorway like he'd manifested from the storm itself, and every instinct Maya had spent 5 years honing screamed danger. Not the ordinary kind, not like Dennis with his petty power plays, or the drunk customers who got handsy after midnight, or the bill collectors who called her phone with threats wrapped in professional courtesy. This was something older, something that made her hindbrain want to drop her gaze and bare her throat, something that bypassed rational thought and went straight to the ancient parts of her brain that still remembered when humans were prey. He was tall, easily 6'3", with dark hair that somehow remained perfect despite the deluge outside. He wore a black coat that probably cost more than her car, tailored to emphasize the predatory grace of his movements, but it was his face that caught her. Beautiful in the way of Renaissance paintings, all sharp angles and classical proportions, ageless in a way that made it impossible to guess whether he was 30 or 50, and his eyes. Even from across the diner, his eyes were impossible, dark but luminous, like light trapped in obsidian, ancient and knowing, and fixed on the boy with an intensity that should have been frightening. Those eyes swept the diner with the efficiency of someone conducting a tactical assessment, cataloging exits and threats and irrelevant details in the space of a heartbeat. When his gaze landed on Elijah, his expression transformed, relief so profound it looked like pain, love so fierce it was almost violent in its intensity. The careful control he'd worn like armor cracked just for a moment, and Maya saw beneath it to something raw and desperate and entirely human despite everything else about him that wasn't. Elijah. The name came out rough, almost broken, carried on a breath that sounded like a prayer and a curse tangled together. The boy's head jerked up, the fork clattering against the plate. For a moment, fear flashed across his face, then resignation, then something more complicated that looked like relief mixed with guilt. Father. The word carried weight that didn't match the boy's age, formality that spoke of old rules and older power and dynamics Maya didn't understand. The man crossed the diner in 3 strides that seemed to cover too much distance too quickly, physics bending slightly around him, and Maya found herself standing without conscious thought, her body placing itself between them. Stupid, reckless, suicidal probably, given whatever this man was and the power that rolled off him like heat from asphalt in summer. But her feet had moved before her brain caught up, before self-preservation could override the instinct that said children needed protecting, even from their own fathers, especially from their own fathers. She could feel the force of his attention shift to her, could feel the air pressure change like a storm front rolling in, could feel the weight of his gaze like a physical thing pressing against her skin. Up close, he was even more impossible. His eyes weren't just dark, they were bottomless, pupils blown wide and reflecting light that wasn't there, and something moved in those depths that definitely wasn't human. His scent hit her next, cedar and night air and something else, something metallic and ancient that made her mouth go dry. He studied her with an intensity that should have been terrifying, was terrifying, except Maya had looked into the eyes of monsters before, and this felt different, dangerous, yes, deadly, absolutely, but not cruel. Not yet. I fed him, she said, keeping her voice steady through sheer stubbornness and the particular brand of fatalism that came from having nothing left to lose. He was hungry. It wasn't an explanation or an apology, just fact, delivered with the blunt honesty of someone who'd stopped caring about consequences somewhere around the third eviction notice. The man's gaze moved from her face to the plate of half-eaten food, to his son's guilty expression, then back to her. Something flickered across his features. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of something he hadn't expected to find in a roadside diner in the middle of nowhere. His head tilted slightly, a gesture that was eerily inhuman despite the human face, and his nostrils flared as if catching a scent. Maya watched his expression shift through several emotions too quickly to track, landing finally on something that looked almost like respect. He has a habit of running away, the man said, and there was dry humor beneath the worry, affection beneath the sternness, the particular exhaustion of a parent who'd had this conversation before, and a worse habit of refusing to ask for help when he needs it. Pride runs in the family. His mouth quirked slightly, acknowledging some private irony. I am grateful that he encountered someone with your particular brand of compassion. He reached into his coat, and Maya's muscles tensed before she could stop them, her body preparing for violence, for a weapon, for whatever came next. But he only pulled out a wallet, leather that looked soft as butter and probably cost more than her monthly rent, extracting bills with the kind of casual motion that said money had never been an object, had never been anything but an abstract concept to be deployed as needed. For the meal, he said, holding out what Maya recognized as $100 bills, several of them, far more than the $23 the food had cost. And for your kindness to my son? It's just chicken tenders, Maya said, not taking the money, her hands staying firmly at her sides. Something about this felt like a test she didn't understand, a game with rules she hadn't been taught, the kind of situation where accepting payment would mean something more than a transaction. She'd learned to trust those instincts, learned that in situations where the rules didn't make sense, the safest move was usually to do nothing. The man studied her for a long moment, and Maya had the unsettling sensation of being truly seen for the first time in years, of having every defense and wall and carefully constructed facade stripped away by that ancient gaze. His expression shifted into something she couldn't read, something that looked almost like approval mixed with curiosity, mixed with a calculation she didn't understand. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, something formal and binding and weighted with significance. "You're not afraid of me," he said, and it wasn't quite a question, more an observation that seemed to surprise him. "Should I be?" Maya countered, because yes, she was afraid. Of course she was afraid. Everything about him screamed apex predator, screamed danger, screamed things that went bump in the night and actually had teeth. But she had learned long ago that showing fear only made certain monsters more interested, only painted a target on your back and invited the kind of attention that ended badly. His smile was sharp and honest, revealing teeth that seemed just slightly too white, too perfect, too predatory. Most people are. They sense what I am even if they don't understand it. Survival instinct, genetic memory, the hindbrain recognizing threat even when the conscious mind rationalizes it away. He glanced at his son, some wordless communication passing between them, then returned his attention to Maya. But you already knew I wasn't human, didn't you? It wasn't really a question, but Maya found herself nodding anyway, acknowledging what her body had known the moment he walked through the door. Yeah, I knew. And yet you positioned yourself between me and my son, knowing. He said it like it meant something, like it revealed some quality worth noting. Interesting. Dominic. She didn't know his name yet, but somehow the knowledge appeared in her head like it had always been there, studied her with renewed intensity. Tell me, do you enjoy working here, in this place that pays you barely enough to survive, where your manager looks at you like you're something he owns, where your future consists of more of the same until your body gives out or your spirit breaks entirely? The accuracy of his assessment hit like a physical blow, and Maya felt her defenses slam up hard and fast. That's none of your business. Perhaps not, but I find myself in your debt, and debts matter in my world. They carry weight, obligation, consequence. The way he said it made the words sound like an oath, like something binding and serious and not to be taken lightly. I have a proposition for you. Maya's laugh came out bitter, sharp-edged with all the times that word had been used as prelude to something degrading. I've heard that one before. Thanks, but I'm not interested in whatever, not that kind of proposition. His voice carried a flash of something hot, offense maybe, or the kind of anger that came from being assumed the worst, from being judged by the actions of lesser predators. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop several degrees, frost forming on the windows, and Maya realized with creeping certainty that whatever control he maintained was more impressive than she thought. I would never insult you or myself with such an offer. What I'm proposing is employment, legitimate, well-compensated, and desperately needed. He gestured to his son, who was watching the exchange with careful attention, his ancient eyes moving between them like he was watching a chess match. Elijah requires a tutor, someone human, someone patient, someone compassionate, someone he can intimidate or manipulate, which eliminates most candidates. Dominic's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. You defended him without knowing who he was, without knowing who I was, without expecting anything in return. That's rare and valuable. I have a job, Maya said, even as she felt the weight of the eviction notice in her locker, the impossible math of rent and bills and survival that never quite added up no matter how many shifts she worked. That pays minimum wage and leaves you one emergency from homelessness, Dominic said. And it wasn't cruel, wasn't mocking, just fact delivered with the same blunt honesty she'd used earlier. I can smell the fear on you, the desperation. You're one broken down car or one angry manager away from sleeping on the streets, and you know it. Pride is admirable, but it doesn't pay rent. Maya wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, wanted to defend the dignity of her choices and her circumstances, but he wasn't wrong. She was drowning, had been drowning for months, and pride wouldn't keep her warm when winter came and her landlord changed the locks. What exactly are you offering? $5,000 a month, Dominic said, and the number hit like a thunderbolt, impossible and terrifying, and exactly enough to be tempting. You'll live in the manor, all expenses covered, private quarters, full access to the library and grounds, meals provided. Your only responsibility is Elijah's education and well-being. Standard curriculum plus etiquette, history, and cultural studies relevant to our world. 5,000 a month. The number ricocheted through her head, bouncing off the walls of her skull, impossible to process. That was more than she made in 3 months at the diner, more than she'd ever made in her life, more than enough to save, to escape, to build something resembling a future. It was too much. Nobody offered that kind of money without strings, without hidden costs, without something dark waiting beneath the surface. "What aren't you telling me?" Maya asked, because there was always something, always a catch, always a reason that generosity revealed itself as something else entirely. Dominic's smile was sharp and honest, and she appreciated that more than false reassurance. "Many things. I'm telling you that my son is 7 years old and has driven away 4 tutors in the last year. I'm telling you that we live by rules that will seem strange to you, that our household operates according to customs and hierarchies your world has forgotten. I'm telling you that you'll be entering a world of politics and power you don't understand." He paused, his gaze holding hers with uncomfortable intensity. "But I'm also telling you that you'll be safe. You have my word, my protection, and my oath that no harm will come to you from me or mine. And my word is binding in ways your kind doesn't understand." Your kind. The phrase hung in the air between them, confirmation of what her instincts had been screaming since he walked through the door. Not human, something else, something old, something that made her heartbeat quicken and her breath shallow. Adrenaline and attraction and terror mixing into something she couldn't name, didn't want to name, refused to acknowledge as anything other than survival instinct. She should refuse, should walk away, should keep her head down and her life small and her heart locked away where nothing could reach it, where she'd carefully placed it 5 years ago after learning that opening yourself to others only gave them ammunition, only gave them ways to hurt you that cut deeper than fists ever could. Playing it safe had kept her alive, had kept her functioning, had kept her from the kind of catastrophic mistakes that ended with obituaries or missing persons reports. But playing it safe had also gotten her here. An eviction notice, a manager who treated her like property, a future that looked like more of the same grinding poverty until she disappeared entirely. Another statistic, another casualty of a system that chewed up people like her and spat out the bones. Maya looked at Elijah, really looked at him, and saw herself reflected back, scared, alone, desperate for someone to see him as more than a problem or a paycheck. She'd spent 5 years wishing someone had been there for her when she was that age, wishing someone had seen past her defenses and offered safety instead of exploitation. 1 month trial, she heard herself say, the words emerging before cautioned could strangle them. And if I don't like it, if anything feels wrong, I walk away. No questions asked, no strings attached, no consequences. Agreed. Dominic extended his hand, and when Maya took it, his skin was cool against hers. Not quite corpse cold, but definitely not human warm, and something passed between them. Recognition, potential, the first note of a song she didn't yet know how to sing. His fingers tightened briefly, grip firm enough to feel the strength there, the power he was carefully restraining. Then he released her hand, and she felt the absence like a chill, like the loss of something she hadn't known she needed. Hours later, Maya sat in the passenger seat of a car that cost more than she'd made in 3 years, probably more than she'd made in her entire life. Leather soft as butter and dashboard displaying information she didn't understand. She'd gone back to her apartment for her few possessions, clothes that fit in 2 garbage bags, books, a photo album she couldn't bring herself to throw away, even though looking at it hurt. Dennis had barely looked up when she quit, just grunted and told her not to expect a reference. She hadn't expected one. The city lights gave way to forest darkness as Dominic drove, with the easy confidence of someone who owned the roads, who'd never had to worry about traffic laws or speed limits or consequences. Elijah slept in the back seat, exhausted from his adventure, his small face peaceful in a way it hadn't been in the diner. Maya watched the trees blur past, ancient oaks and evergreens that seemed to lean in as they passed, like the forest itself was aware of their passage. "There are rules," Dominic said, breaking the silence that had stretched for miles. "Some will seem arbitrary, others will seem antiquated, but they exist for your protection as much as ours." He glanced at her, dashboard lights casting his face in sharp relief, all angles and shadows. "Don't go into the East Wing after dark. Don't accept invitations from other houses without consulting me first. Don't discuss what you see or hear with outsiders. And most importantly, don't enter my study without permission." "What's in your study?" Maya asked because some part of her refused to be properly intimidated, refused to nod and smile and accept rules without question. His smile was sharp. "Things that would give you nightmares. Things that should remain forgotten. Secrets that are mine to keep." He said it lightly, but she heard the steel beneath the words, heard the warning that this was one boundary he wouldn't tolerate crossing. "But the rest of the manor is yours to explore. Library, gardens, kitchens. Elijah will show you around once you're settled." The manor emerged from the trees like something from a Gothic novel, all stone and towers and windows that gleamed like watchful eyes. It was massive, impossibly old, the kind of place that should have been a museum or a tourist attraction, but instead sat hidden in forest depths, protected by gates and walls, and probably things she didn't want to know about. Ivy climbed the walls in patterns that looked almost deliberate, and gargoyles perched at the corners, their faces twisted into expressions that seemed too lifelike for comfort. Maya's breath caught despite herself, despite every instinct that said showing awe was showing weakness. It was beautiful and terrible and entirely too much, and some part of her that had been sleeping for 5 years woke up and whispered that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth the risk. "Welcome," Dominic said, his voice carrying layers she was only beginning to understand, resonance that went beyond mere sound to something that vibrated in her bones. "To your new home." The car rolled through gates that closed behind them with decisive finality, iron bars sliding into place with the solid thunk of a lock engaging, and Maya wondered if she'd just made the best decision of her life or signed away what remained of her carefully reconstructed soul. The answer, she suspected, would be both. The manor's front doors opened as they approached, light spilling out into the darkness, and Maya saw figures waiting in the entrance, staff probably, or maybe family, or maybe something else entirely. She was about to find out. Dominic brought the car to a stop and turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Last chance to change your mind. Once you cross that threshold, certain things become binding. Not a trap, just consequence. You'll be under my protection, which means you'll be marked as mine. Other houses will know, other powers will take notice. He paused. It's not too late to walk away. But it was too late, had been too late the moment she'd sat down across from a hungry child and decided consequences be damned. Maya opened the car door and stepped out into the cool night air, into the scent of roses and night-blooming jasmine, and something else, something that smelled like time and power and secrets. I'm not walking away, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Dominic's smile was slow and satisfied, like she'd just confirmed something he'd suspected. No, he agreed, coming around the car to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the coolness radiating from his skin. I didn't think you would. He offered his arm, a gesture from another century, and after a moment's hesitation, Maya took it. Together they walked toward the light, toward the waiting figures, toward whatever came next. Elijah stirred in the back seat and climbed out, rubbing his eyes and looking suddenly young and vulnerable and real. He fell into step on Maya's other side, and she felt his small hand slip into hers. The gesture nearly broke something in her chest, trust offered so simply, so completely, after everything. She squeezed his hand gently and didn't let go. Whatever she'd signed up for, whatever waited in that enormous manor with its Gothic architecture and its dangerous master, she'd deal with it. She'd survived worse. Probably. The doors loomed larger as they approached, and Maya could see details now. Carved scenes of hunts and battles and things that might have been historical or might have been mythological. She couldn't tell which. The figures in the doorway resolved into people. A stern woman in black who looked like a housekeeper, a young man with sharp features and calculating eyes, others behind them in shadow. They all stopped and stared when they saw her, expressions ranging from surprise to suspicion to something that might have been concern. The woman in black stepped forward, her gaze moving from Maya to Dominic and back again. Master, is this wise? A human, here, now, given everything. Mrs. Blackwood, Dominic interrupted, his voice pleasant but carrying an edge that made everyone straighten, made the air feel heavy. This is Maya. She'll be serving as Elijah's tutor. You'll prepare the blue room for her and ensure she has everything she needs. It wasn't a request. The woman, Mrs. Blackwood, pressed her lips into a thin line, but nodded. Of course, Master. Welcome, Miss Maya. The title felt strange, felt like playing dress-up in someone else's life, but Maya nodded acknowledgement. They crossed the threshold together, and she felt something shift, some change in the air or in herself, a sense of stepping from one world into another. The entrance hall was cavernous, all dark wood and tapestries, and a chandelier that probably weighed more than her car. A grand staircase swept upward into shadow, and corridors branched off in multiple directions, the manor sprawling in ways that seemed to defy the external architecture. Your room is on the 3rd floor, east wing, the safe part, Dominic said, anticipating her question. Elijah's room is next door, and mine is at the end of the hall. You'll have privacy, but proximity if anything goes wrong. Mrs. Blackwood will show you up and help you settle. We'll begin properly tomorrow. He released her arm but didn't step away immediately, his dark eyes searching her face. Sleep well, Maya, and welcome to the family. Family. The word hung in the air, too heavy, too significant, too weighted with meaning she didn't understand. But Elijah squeezed her hand again, and Maya decided that maybe, just maybe, she could figure out what it meant here. Mrs. Blackwood gestured toward the stairs, and Maya followed, her hand still held by a 7-year-old who'd stopped being just any hungry child the moment his father had walked through those diner doors. She glanced back once and found Dominic still watching, his expression unreadable, and something in his gaze made her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with fear. Then she turned away and climbed the stairs, leaving the Vampire King in the entrance hall, and entered whatever new life she'd just chosen. Tomorrow would bring answers, would bring understanding, would bring all the complications and consequences she'd just invited into her world. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, Maya felt like maybe she was exactly where she needed to be. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double check responses.